In Congress, July 4, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them, a decent respect to the opinion of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty, to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having indirect object the establishment of absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operations till his assent should be obtained, and when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodations of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the rights of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them, and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers incapable of annihilation have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payable of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. Assent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its power in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their safety, for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former system of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance unless suspended in their operations till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them, and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions on the rights of these people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolution, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise. The state remaining, in the meantime, exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government, for suspending our legislatures and declaring themselves invested with powers to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is, at this time, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens, taken captive on the high seas, to bear arms against their country, to become the executioner of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince, whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connection and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of a right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be, totally dissolved. And that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
My name's Erin Dumeyer. I'm director of the Mark Twain Library and part of the Fabulous Conversations Committee. Thank you, Michael, for bringing those words to life this evening. Hearing the declaration read aloud reminds us that it's not simply a document on a page, but it's really a public statement, a call to action, and a bold expression of ideals that were both revolutionary and, as history shows us time and time again, still yet unfinished. Tonight's program is hosted by the library's Conversations Committee, which is an award-winning series co-sponsored by the Mark Twain Library and the League of Women Voters of Reading. Through these programs, we strive to create opportunities for thoughtful, engaging, and timely conversations in our community here in Reading. As we move into our discussion, we have the opportunity to look more closely at the context in which the Declaration was written, the people and ideas behind it, and the ways its words have continued to shape and challenge our nation over the past 250 years. We're so pleased to have Michael Langlois with us this evening. Michael's a dynamic performer, as you just saw, a director, a lecturer, and a storyteller with decades of experience on the stage. Through his work as an actor, director, and educator, he has helped people of all ages find their voice and bring stories to life. We're grateful for his energy and the immediacy he has brought to tonight's reading. We're also delighted to welcome Dr. Leslie Lindenauer, professor of history at Western Connecticut State University, where she teaches early American history, public history, local history, and gender studies. Her work explores American memory and identity, including the American Revolution. She brings a thoughtful and engaging perspective to this evening's discussion. Michael and Leslie, I'll invite you to come have a seat up here. Thank you so much for being here. So my first question is for Michael. How did you approach reading this document aloud versus, just kind of reading it silently?
Thank you. I think the first thing I tried to do was remind myself that this was often read aloud. In fact, that's how the news of this spreads so very often. And these are not just words on a page. They're eloquent, to be sure. They're an absolute statement of ideals for the 18th century, but they are angry. There is fire underneath them. And the voice and the voices that composed and wrote these were speaking passionately. I think we have this sense that in the 18th century, everyone just sort of stood up, elocuted, looked fabulous in their linen shirts and elocuted politely and said, if you so please, we would like to, if it doesn't bother you too much, break free from your reign. But in fact, it wasn't that way. And so I approached it like an actor would and asked the simple question, what do these people want? And if you ask that question, the answer is contained quite eloquently within there.
My next question is for Leslie. Can you put us a little bit into the context of what life was like and how things were going in 1776?
Sure. I think that one of the things that I think about is that once the states declared independence, it was as much about declaring independence from the crown as it was trying to figure out who was going to rule this new country. And so those are the ideals that spin themselves out across the centuries after the passage of the Declaration of Independence. It was, especially if you look at the hotbed of the Revolution, a fairly, but for this corner of Connecticut, a fairly patriot-driven New England, and incredibly high rate of literacy across gender. increasing literacy among people of color as well in New England. And so these were communities that had access to some of the most revolutionary and radical documents that were penned in the 18th century, including documents like Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which everyone referred to at the time. People were hurt. People were hurting because of the function that the roles that Parliament was playing here, the roles that the Crown was playing. People were upset, although there's some discussion among scholars about just how burdensome the taxes actually were. And so that just, again, allows us to circle on back and say, this is not just about taxes, although that's what we all learned in high school, right? Taxation without representation. And that last part of the phrase, what's the last part of that phrase? Taxation without representation is what? Tyranny. Yep. That word is key, and it comes out so brilliantly when you read it, Michael. It's so remarkable to hear those words and to think about Thomas Jefferson penning those words with little nudges from Franklin and Adams, but that eloquence and that anger, particularly around that idea of tyranny and despotism, comes through when you hear the language.
Yeah, and that's what you do as part of your career. You help young people find their voice.
Yes.
So how do you feel like what does this document say about the power of voice and the power of expression?
I think that's a great question. And I think for me, it just reinforces the idea that we all have a voice. And that is our God-given right. And consequently, it's a shame if we don't use that. We don't take advantage of that voice and to speak eloquently. And sometimes it's easy, and oftentimes it's really difficult. And I think that's, I love the section in the Declaration where Jefferson sort of acknowledges human nature is such that you're just going to go along for the longest time while, you will suffer evils while evils are sufferable until you reach a point. And it's at that point that's when your voice becomes the most important. And hearing that, to hear these words, rather than just sort of read them on a page, but to hear these words, I think it really does, it brings you into the moment so much more than just reading it on a page, because you hear it differently in your head than you do when it actually pops out of your mouth. And you start to realize the power of the word tyrant. And saying that, absolute despotism, I mean, those phrases, he's not messing around. And to hear the power of that and the force behind that and the passion behind that really only comes out when you hear it aloud.
And Leslie, you're a historian, so this is kind of a great question. How do you think the Declaration has shaped the way America tells the story of our nation's founding?
It has and does all the time. I think that one of the things that we're struggling with now is that there's been consistently an attempt to believe deeply and to prove that the Declaration is a unifying document. And it is, in many ways. All you have to do is listen to those words and understand how remarkably powerful they are. But in fact, what happens is that those words, I think in many ways, inspire an unintentional revolution over the decades, because they are so powerful. Because once those words exist in the air, enslaved Black people understand that those words apply to them too. Women understand that those words apply to them too. And so the ability to take that language and articulate the importance to a diverse country, and America was already diverse in the 18th century, is, I think, one of the most remarkable elements of the history of the Declaration of Independence.
So how do you feel then that we can honor those ideals that we heard about in the Declaration while also acknowledging those kind of contradictions present?
I think it's not simple, and I think we want to believe that desperately want to believe that as a unifying document, the Declaration is something that should be celebrated, and it should. I'm awestruck, constantly awestruck by the actions taken by the founders and by so-called ordinary people in the 18th century who put their lives on the line, who committed treason to articulate their values. But that doesn't mean that it's mutually exclusive in trying to understand the complexity of this moment, and in some cases the hypocrisy of this moment. Thomas Jefferson, who wrote this glorious language, owned 200 to 300 people over the course of his lifetime, and I'm sure that this is information that you are all aware of. And so how do we come to terms with that? And I think it's important for us to come to terms with that, to understand just how glorious this nation is and can be. When we see the way those words that he penned spin themselves out across the decades after the Declaration.
My next question is for Michael. It was both a political document and a persuasive piece of writing. What do you feel like in the language of the Declaration makes it effective?
I think one of the things that he does really well is in his own writing, one of the ways he presents his case is by essentially inundating you with facts. He sort of most of the document is essentially just a list of grievances. And some of those grievances, rhetorically, early on, some of those grievances people read and in England said, we don't even know what he's talking about. But he slowly sort of builds this argument, and he gets more specific. And if you listen to, he gets more, I don't want to say hyperbolic, but there's a little bit of hyperbole there when he starts to lay in, he starts to actually characterize things now. Despotism, tyrant, barbarous. He starts to throw in those adjectives toward the tail end of the argument. And that's, you're always sort of taught when you're writing an argument, when you're going on stage, start big and end big. And that's what he's doing. He starts strong and he ends strong in the most emotional terms. Even when he gets to the grievances, that list of grievances ends on this really emotional, powerful, angry note. And then he appeals to heaven and lives, duty, sacred honor. And so he sort of ends strong. The other thing that sticks out to me, I cut my teeth on Shakespeare as an actor, and good writers help you read their work. Shakespeare is constantly allowing clues and giving clues to his actors just by virtue of his writing and the rhythms that are contained within that. And that's what Jefferson does. The writing, you almost can't, if you read it out loud, and that's another sort of virtue of reading it, the document out loud, you almost can't help but pick up the pace and start to become more urgent as you read and as the document goes along. So it propels you as a reader, and consequently as a listener as well. If the reader is getting worked up, you too are being brought with them, and you're getting worked up. And if you're reading this to a large group of people, that's motivating them, that's working them up, that's working on their emotional level as well. Because yes, it is absolutely an intellectual argument, but it is an emotional argument, and that's one of the things that, because it wasn't a foregone conclusion that we've declared independence and now everyone's going to rally to our cause and that's going to be that, and here we go. This had to be persuasive, not only to England, but it had to be persuasive to the people who were going to fight and die for the words on these pages.
Yeah, I feel like people used to read, they just used to read out loud so much more in the past than they do now. We find that with we have some of Mark Twain's books here still, and you could see the notations from where he would want to enunciate words because he was so used to reading out loud, which we've only almost sort of like lost that art form.
Yeah.
But so we've been having some great fun at Mark Twain Library, hosting a lot of events related to the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So I would like to ask you both why you feel like it's important for a civic center like a public library to acknowledge our nation's birthday.
I think that some of the most wonderful and important work right now for America 250 is being done by libraries and small museums. I think that that's where you find people grappling with the complexity, and it's in libraries where that complexity can emerge. And I think that it does us no favors if we pretend that it's not complex. Because I listen to those words and they're so powerful, and of course they resonate. Of course they resonate. How could they not? And here in a library, when we can take the time and make the space for those conversations, it's a place that, 25% of the population can attend college, and so the privileged people at Western Connecticut State University, a public regional university, who have the opportunity to be in that classroom talking about the Declaration, that's great. But it's in libraries that the entire population can come and talk and think and share.
I would agree, and to dovetail off of that, I think, on these large anniversaries, the 250th, it's an opportunity for us as a culture to let this be a little bit of a pulse check on who we are as people and what's important. I think the 4th of July for so many people is hot dogs and fireworks, and that's it. But when you have these larger anniversaries, you get to engage again with the language and with the thought and with the ideas that are inherent in this document and inherent in the founding, and it is in libraries where that is happening. Again, it just allows for that space. It allows for that conversation, and I would agree. I think it's libraries and small museums that are doing the best work. Absolutely.
Well, we try to always think about equal access at the public library, which brings me to my next question, because the beginning of the document says all men are created equal. It's been interpreted and reinterpreted across generations, but how has that meaning changed over time? And do you feel like that phrase, all men are created equal, is at odds with the entire concept of liberty?
It's not at odds if you interpret it the way people interpreted it in the 18th century, in the 19th century, in the 20th century, because that Declaration of Independence served as a model for, in the little packets that you have there are 2 examples of petitions that were filed by enslaved African Americans with their state legislatures, including here in Connecticut from Fairfield County and in Massachusetts, where they used the language of the Declaration of Independence to say, are we not men? You say that natural rights belong to everyone, as Jefferson says in maybe 5-7 in the Declaration. Aren't we included in that? They're amazing documents. And the same thing happens in 1848 when the women gather in Seneca Falls, and they literally use the Declaration as their model. They have the introduction and the preamble, and then the body of the work where they're declaring their problems that they have with the world that they live in, and they use the Declaration as the very model of where they want this to go. Frederick Douglass's speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," I think is one of the most important speeches in the American canon. And it doesn't matter what I'm teaching, I've never not taught that speech. It's also in your packet where he says, what is that, I'm going to paraphrase, what does that holiday mean to me and my people? What does the 4th? It means nothing to me and my people, and it should mean nothing to you. And he's speaking before a white audience in upstate New York, mostly women. What does it mean to you that we live in a nation that is protecting slavery, even as we celebrate the 4th of July? So it spins itself out. The Declaration is used by women in the suffrage movement in the early 20th century. And so you have a few examples of the way the words of the Declaration continue to resonate and how they push back at the definition of the rights of men to include a diverse and angry audience often.
And I think within that, the phrase sort of immediately after that, they are endowed by their Creator. That idea that it's not something that they should have to fight for. It is their birthright. It is who they are in their very core, in humanity's essence and in our core. If, again, we allow ourselves, exactly as you say, to let it be not just for white, wealthy landowners, but for all. Because the Creator isn't endowing it just to one subset, He's endowing all of us. And I think that's that power of that is inherent there.
So we talked a lot about parts of the document that have been misinterpreted over time. Do you feel like there are parts of the document that are often overlooked, that people don't really pay attention to, that maybe we should?
To me, it's not clear until you hear it read out loud. When you're documenting the issues that the new United States has with the crown, I mean, the specificity with which they're talking, and people, we've lost the ability to pay attention, I think, to the specifics of the document, because the language in the preamble, the introduction and preamble and conclusion is so powerful. That enumeration, man, some of those specific complaints are so illuminating, and we lose track of that, I think, when it's the whole center of the document, and we hear only those important words, about natural and inalienable rights.
I think for me, one of the things is actually one of the more difficult sections to read. And it is that one, when he's enumerating all of the grievances, and he gets to this section about the relationship with Native Americans. It is difficult to read today. And I think it is one of those sections that I think we forget, and it speaks to the complexity of these people, the times in which they were living, the times in which we find ourselves now. And I think that's one of those moments that allow us to, again, check in and see where are we? Is it just as difficult for you to hear as it is for me to read? If it is, why? If it isn't, why? And to have that discussion, and I think that's a section that I think sometimes gets overlooked. Perhaps because it's tucked in amongst that whole other section that we tend to overlook anyway, but perhaps also because it is uncomfortable and sometimes we don't like to look at some of those discomforting things.
It's hard, and it's the very reason when the next major central document in our history that omits the word slavery, because they cannot use the word slavery when they're creating a government, a republic, because it's difficult, and it's equally difficult today to contend with what that means and how it makes us feel.
So before I open it up to questions from the audience, I did want to ask you both, what is one takeaway that you would love audience members to leave with today from this reading?
I think it's that celebrating who we are, where we've been, is not mutually exclusive when it comes to understanding the complexity of this moment and what it means to us today. I think that we're capable of doing that. We're capable of looking at our history and acknowledging its hardness, even as we celebrate who we are as an American people today.
I think for me, it's that this is a living, breathing document, and that I think it is also an aspirational document. It's not sort of set in amber, and we can take it out at big anniversaries and look at it every once in a while and think it's quaint or maybe powerful for some of the language, but it's still, that was then. That was 250 years ago. It enumerates, I think, in many ways who we want to be. And it allows us to ask the question, and that's what I would hope you all leave with, is continue to ask the question, where are we today in relationship to this document?
I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. Yes?
Yeah, thank you to all of you for this. It's really great. And I was struck reading ahead and then listening to you how much of the middle I had forgotten from high school. That was probably the last time I read the list of complaints and grievances. and I've forgotten how good and specific they are. But I own a house in northeastern Connecticut in Windham County. It was built in 1720. And there's a wonderful 2-volume history of Windham County. And it talks a lot about not what domestic life was like, but what political life was like. You know, you had to have a school and a church to make a town. That was a requirement. And the fighting, the infighting over land and positions and beliefs was extremely vigorous. And I had never, until I read the history, imagined the foreparents of America being in contention like that. I mean, I would kind of look back at this as a sort of like, these guys got together and this was cool and that's what they did. But that's not really what it was like in that era at all. So again.
Right, and in spite of the fact that culturally women were discouraged from speaking about issues in public, mostly political issues, didn't mean that they didn't. Women were engaged in political fighting in different ways than the men, certainly. They're not invited to Independence Hall. They're not members of the Continental Congress, but they're talking about this stuff, and they're publishing pieces in the newspapers. There are wonderful petitions that are passed by women who say, this is our chance to shine. There's a great there's a boycott that's organized in North Carolina, in Edenton, North Carolina, by women there. It's made fun of by the British, but where they basically say, we're going to tell them who we are. We're women, and we're not going to wear costumes like the men in Boston do when they said they were going to fight against the TF. It's brilliant the way women learn from the Declaration to claim that language for themselves.
And even Abigail Adams, who argues vociferously to her husband, saying, while you're busy doing the work of independence, don't forget the ladies. I think is the phrase that she used.
Remember the ladies.
And yes, you'll have another revolution on your hands.
She says that specifically.
Yeah.
She says all men would be tyrants if they could. Those are language, it's language that she uses in personal letters with her husband, but it's language that exists in the air among women and men alike.
Yeah. And I think to your point too, the other thing that I think we as people do, and this is just a human trait, we cast this document in amber, but we love to lionize the great people of humanity, and we cast them in stone and bronze, and they are never smiling in any of those images, and they start to become godlike. You just look at the Capitol Rotunda and you see the apotheosis of George Washington. And while that's a marvelous celebration, it does suck the humanness out of these people. And to read what you're talking about, to see that these were people who were they were contentious, and they were arguing, and they were fractious. And they were people, and it's easy to sort of forget that they were all upright, never smiled, and went to bed in their stone, their bronze statue. But they were human beings, and that's what I think that speaks to really well.
Yes.
Kind of along those lines, to what extent was it known who authored the document, and what was Jefferson's reputation? How widespread was it?
Well, we can both answer that. Jefferson's pretty specific about the process by which the Declaration was penned, and it does start out with a committee of 5 people, and they all say, "No, you do it." He was known as a good writer, and not a great speaker. He had a lisp. And so shied away from public speech, but a brilliant writer, and so they ceded the control over the document, but they came back in the last and did some revisions of it before it was released in the form that we know it.
Yeah. But the people who were hearing this being read, were they aware, and what did they know of him?
Well,
I don't know the
Yeah,
answer to
that's a
that.
great question.
I mean, it's read across the 13 states,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's a varied population there. I'm betting, if I had to guess, that most people didn't know. They knew that it was penned in Philadelphia, they knew where it originated, and they knew that Congress had to pass it, but I don't know that they knew who wrote it.
I'm just, wondering, what was the conversation like? Hey, this guy, whoever wrote this, pretty good stuff.
I don't know. Now I'm really curious.
Yeah, I know. I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, you might have a better sense of this. I know that as time went on, I think that John Adams started to take like little dribs and drabs more credit as time passed. It sort of started as sort of all Jefferson or mostly Jefferson with just a hint there, a nudge there from Franklin and Adams, but as time passed, Adams started to sort of insinuate himself into the writing a little bit more.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, in many ways, the best thing to John Adams was his wife Abigail. but I do think too that part of that process for John Adams is sort of ignoring the fact that it's Abigail Adams who presses him to acknowledge slavery in this document, and Jefferson says, and he's right, there's no way Congress will pass the Declaration if we talk about slavery. And I think that he's putting that behind him as he tries to lay some claim to the document, the fact that it doesn't acknowledge, and most scholars would say that because it doesn't acknowledge it, because the Constitution doesn't acknowledge, except to reinforce that inevitably ends in civil war. But I think that Adams, and he wants to be there, right? He wants to be there.
Totally.
He wants to be there. He wants to be the head of the peace negotiations in the treaty. Wants to be known as the person who negotiated the Treaty of Paris. He and Franklin don't get along because Franklin is beloved. He's beloved in Philadelphia and he's beloved in Paris, and no one likes John Adams. So if he can lay claim to this, then I think that and you're absolutely right. He inserts himself recently.
Thank you so much, Michael and Leslie.